Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the second chapter in the book of Malachi. Now, in the first chapter, we witness the object of his indictment being the priest of Israel, and the momentum from the first chapter carries over into the second, but by the 10th verse, it transitions into a universal national indictment of sins which were endemic in Israel at the time. And Malachi was written in the 430s AD, BM, before Messiah. So it's chronologically the latest, as well as the the final in the narrative sequence in the Old Testament. And so having the specific sins which he condemns were them selling themselves short on the sacrifices. There were specific obligations and details to which the priests were to attend to in the offering of animal sacrifices, and they were selling them short. They were offering defiled animals. The animals were to be without blemish, the typology signifying the sinless savior to come. And the opening verse in the second chapter reads, "And now, O priests, this command is for you. If you do not hear, and if you do not take it to heart, to give esteem to my name, said Yahweh of hosts, I shall send a curse upon you, and I shall curse your blessings, and indeed I have cursed them, because you do not take it to heart." So he outlines some warnings and consequences and the imperative of obedience, and he explains it because they have a sacred charge, and what they are commanded to do, they are obligated to fulfill as the essential intermediaries between humanity and divinity. So priests played a very central function in Israel's spiritual life. "See, I shall rebuke your seed, and scatter dung before your faces, the dung of your festivals, and you shall be taken away with it." So because they had defiled the offerings and sacrifices, he was going to in turn defile them by the scatological analogy of being smeared with dung on their faces, which shouldn't be interpreted too literally, but the gist is clear that they treated him like trash. They were going to be trashed. He exalts you in as much as you exalt him, and he degrades you in as much as you degrade him. There's no escaping the inevitable consequences for it. "And you shall know that I have sent this command to you, as being my covenant with Levi, said Yahweh of hosts." Levi was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, through whom the priestly caste were descended, the tribe of Levi, and that's because not anything special that Levi did, but it was really his descendant Moses and his brother Aaron, through whom the high priest descended biologically, and so the priesthood was invested in one tribe in Israel, and that was Levi. "My covenant with him was life and peace, and I gave them to him to fear, and he feared me and stood in awe of my name." Now, the name carries huge significance in Israelite spiritual life. His name was Yahweh, which means I am that I am. In other words, the eternally self-existing one. And it was so sacred that the duty to honor it and revere it and respect it was given its own commandment, the third commandment, which is against blasphemy, which is bringing the name into disrepute, using it vulgarly or casually or anything less than befitting the respect that is due to an omniscient and omnipotent and all-loving being. "The Torah of truth was in his mouth, and unrighteousness was not found on his lips. He walked with me in peace and straightness, and turned away many from wickedness." This is the pristine function and its pristine form of the priestly job and obligation. It's to dissuade people from their natural waywardness, to keep them on the straight and narrow path, so that, and the law is truth, and nowhere should unrighteousness be found on your lips. Now, from the lips, we read in James' 3rd chapter that the tongue is an instrument of unlimited potential. It's the source of blessings and curses, and so we wield words as weapons, and they can be destructive or constructive, and priests are especially obligated to choose their words with prudence and tact and wisdom. Now, the three things which ought to govern a minister's choice of words is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And there's such a thing as unpleasant truths which bring conviction, which are sometimes necessary. Now, a minister must know how to hurt the one he loves, or they love, gender neutral, because without conviction, there can be no conversion and no commitment. So it's really incumbent upon us, we who minister, to exercise our words in caution and to realize the weight that they carry. For the lips of a priest should guard knowledge, and they seek the Torah from his mouth, for he is the messenger of Yahweh of hosts. That's a pretty exalted standard, to be the messenger of the King of Heaven, who's sovereign on earth, and the lips should guard knowledge. Knowledge is essential to the functioning of civilized society. It is the fruits of civilization are knowledge, if nothing less, and it's what ultimately separates us from the animals and gives us our superior status as the dominant species of Earth, but it is also the source of many miseries. The unintelligent use of intelligence is the source of many woes, and human history is littered throughout with that. But you have turned from the way, you have caused many to stumble in the Torah, you have corrupted the covenant of Levi, said Yahweh of hosts. So the priest, in deviating from their course, they had a ripple effect on society at large, because they were the intermediary between Israelite society and divinity. So inasmuch as they were honoring their covenants in their pristine form, so too was Israel led on the straight and narrow path, which is what Yahweh commands and expects nothing less of us. And it was incumbent upon the priest to honor and take seriously their role as the leaders of men, spiritual leaders. And the covenant of Levi was, strictly speaking, the priesthood, which was vested in them around the foundation of Moses and Aaron. And I shall make you despised and low before all the people, because you are not guarding my ways, and are showing partiality in the Torah. So again, you are degraded inasmuch as you degrade him. You are exalted by the opposite side of the same coin. You are exalted inasmuch as you exalt him and give him the honor that is his due. He will exalt you in proportion and in accordance to the spirit with which you exercise towards him. And partiality in the Torah, Deuteronomy 1:17, condemns the. It speaks of Yahweh as being impartial. He's not moved by socioeconomic status or race or any other identifier that is very much an artificial construct of man, which we use to class and categorize and ultimately render some superior to others. There is no such thing. It's an even scale with Yahweh. He judges the heart and not the appearance. Have we not all one Father? Did not one El create us? Why do we act treacherously against one another to profane the covenants of the fathers? So this verse comments on our common point of origin, which was from a cosmic creator. The creator of heaven and earth is also the bestower of life, and as such we owe it to him to live as if he exists. Now, many believers affirm the existence of a supreme deity, but live as if he didn't exist, and their actions belittle his existence, because the existence of such a being entails that one day we will be judged in accordance to how we live this life. Judah has acted treacherously, and an abomination has been done in Israel and in Jerusalem, for Judah has profaned what is sacred to Yahweh, which he has loved, and has married the daughters of a foreign mighty one. Judah was the southern kingdom, which had split following the reign of Solomon, who was the last monarch of a united Israel, and Israel was the name of the northern kingdom, but it retained the national unity. Today, the nation state of Israel is known as such, and in the biblical times, the Israelites were forbidden for marrying outside of their nation, and there was nothing racist about it, as our modern mindsets might condition us to think of such a commandment or injunction as, but is really to preserve the pristine monotheism from being polluted with the paganism of outsiders, and slowly but surely their children are given compromised religion and mixed, and it's an oil and water mixture, Yahweh and the erroneous deities which were worshipped in the adjacent civilizations. Let Yahweh cut off from the tents of Jacob the man who does this, staring up or answering, and bringing an offering to Yahweh of hosts. Jacob was the name of the nation of Israel through whom they were descended. The 12 tribes sprang from his loins, and he was given the name Israel, and his birth name was Jacob, but he earned the name Israel after an encounter with an angel of Elohim. We can read of that in Genesis 35. But the jux of the pass is the consequences for deviating or apostatizing from the way is to be treated accordingly. And this you have done a second time. You cover the altar of Yahweh with tears and weeping and crying, because he no longer regards the offering, nor receives it with pleasure from your hand. Now, the reasons for which he rejected the unacceptable sacrifices are treated at length in the first chapter, so we can really review that on there. There were standards and expectations for acceptable sacrifices, which they ignored at their own peril, and they did, and then they wondered why their miseries were visited upon them, and it was as a consequence of the covenant. The covenant was a two-way street. Blessings, abundant blessings for obedience, and curses and consequences for disobedience. And you said, why? Because Yahweh has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have acted treacherously, though she is your companion and the wife of your covenant. At this juncture in Israelite history, many native Israelites were divorcing their native wives in favor for heathen idolaters and foreigners, so they were discarding the chosen people and mixing with a forbidden races, plural, because all nations outside of Israel were forbidden to intermingle biologically with Israel, and with good reason, and it's because the corrupting influence can imperceptibly but nonetheless totally subvert the whole nation from the purpose for which they were called. And he did not make us, and did he not make one? And he had the remnant of the Spirit. And what is the one? He seeks a seed of Elohim. So you shall guard your spirit, and let none act treacherously against the wife of his youth. So this is a reiteration of the antecedent verse, in that when we enter into a marriage, divorce is not to be considered an option. There are certain legal entailments for legally justified divorces, but it should be avoided like the plague. And when the Messiah encounters the Sadducees, he informs them that the provisions for divorce were interjected into the Mosaic law because of the wickedness of their heart. So divorce is not to be, many people enter marriage in our modern world. I think it's something like a third to a half of even modern American marriages end in divorce, and this has very real ramifications for society at large and the younger generation. It really produces a ripple effect of troubles which could have been alleviated had they really stayed committed to their calling, because marriage is a calling. For I hate divorce, said Yahweh Elohim of Israel, and the one who covers his garment with cruelty, said Yahweh of hosts. So you shall guard your spirit, and do not act treacherously. Now, if Yahweh hates anything, we tend to platitudinously ascribe him as a being of all love, but this sells him short. He is much more complex and dimensional than a being of he is infinite and abundant in his love, yet he is perfectly capable of hating that which is bad. He loves which is good and wants us to cling to what is good and to separate ourselves from that which is bad, which he hates. And divorce is something that he hates, and it's something that we should hate, because we must align our hatreds to the things that he hates. You have wearied Yahweh with your words, and you have said, in what way have we wearied him? And that you say, everyone who does evil is good in the eyes of Yahweh, and he is delighting in them. Or where is the Elohim of justice? He assumes the dialogue form, which he assumed earlier in the first verse, of an anticipated dialogue between the nation of Israel speaking to Yahweh. And now Yahweh is physically indefatigable, yet he is perfectly capable of being wearied by the incessant talk of man who give lip service to him but do not act in as much as he acts, or he would like us to act. And there is such a thing as calling evil good and good evil, Isaiah 5:20, and these erroneous equivocations are imposed by knaves on fools, and it is something very endemic in our own culture. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.